before we talk about agriculture, who were you as a young man?
Well, I grew up with a very loving set of parents, and I was really fortunate in that. And they were very open. They were very loving, and they weren't afraid to give me responsibilities as I was growing up, and small little duties at first, and then more responsibility as I got older.
Was agriculture something you chose or something that chose you?
Well, as I said, my parents gave me responsibilities. We gardened, so I got an early taste of working with plants. My dad had hogs at the time, and so I got to be around animals as well. And early on in life, we even had a milk cow, so I got to see that, and my dad would milk the cow, and of course we would have milk. My mom would make butter for the family, and so when I say we were somewhat self-sustaining in our little home that we had. And so as far as did I choose agriculture, it was a culture. It was our culture growing up, and it was just part of us and part of our daily activities growing up on a small farm and living on the farm.
Where did you grow up, and what was that like?
Well, I grew up in western North Carolina, a small little town called Old Fort, and when I say we were fortunate, yet we were still, when I say somewhat poor, and when I'm referring to saying that we were somewhat poor, I can remember a time that was very clear to me. My dad, and I'd always go with him when I wasn't in school, and so my dad told my mom, he said, I'm going to run up to Mr. Jackson's. He said, I'm going to see if I can cut a load of pulpwood because we had a paper mill about 50 miles away. And he said, I'm going to see if Mr. Jackson will haul the wood to the mill for me. And so I remember riding up to Mr. Jackson's, and my dad got out and he says, Bill, he says, I need some grocery money. He says, I want to cut a load of wood if you will haul it for me. And Bill said, that's great. He says, we need grocery money too. So my dad cut a 2-ton truckload, a 14-foot truck of pulpwood, and loaded it, and then Mr. Jackson hauled it to the paper mill. And I remember when Mr. Jackson came back, it was like $20, and so my dad took 10 and gave Mr. Jackson 10 for hauling the wood. And of course, my dad had to pay for the landowner that he cut the wood off of. So anyway, it equaled out. They both got about $10 by the time my dad paid the landowner for the wood. And so I remember my dad coming in and handing that $10 to my mom and saying, here, Mary, you can go buy groceries. And so the three of us kids went along with my mom, and we knew not to ask for anything. We knew not to go through the store and saying, I want this, I want this, I want this. We were just like three little ducks following behind my mom as she pushed the cart. And believe it or not, for that $10, we got quite a few groceries at that time. And my mom came back, and that was what kind of like our story of how it was sometimes for us.
Outside of your father, obviously, he had a major influence on you. Outside of your father in your early years into farming, after you kind of grew up, was there anyone else who influenced you a lot?
Well, you have to understand that I grew up more in the animal side of things than I grew up in the crops. And it's kind of funny how that I'm more focused on the crop side of things now. My dad gave me, he bought a Hampshire sow, and for those that don't know, it's a black pig with a white stripe on it, and it was a gilt, and of course he told me, he said, if you'll help me, he says, those pigs will be yours. And now I'm 9 years old, and so I was really excited. The sow had 9 pigs, and I think we weaned 8 of them, and so I was more focused on the animals, because the crop growing at that time, I wasn't interested in it other than what we kind of grew in the garden. And a kind of interesting fact on that is when the pigs when we weaned them, we were down in a neighbor's house, and he said, James, I'm wanting a pig. That was my dad. And he said, James, I'm wanting a pig. And he said, well, Phillip has some for sale. He said, well, I've got a 410 shotgun. He says, I'm wanting $15 for it. And he said, well, it's up to Phillip if he wants to. And so I actually traded a pig for that 410 shotgun at 9 years of age. So that was kind of a unique experience. And you look at 9-year-olds today, and how many of them are negotiating to buy a firearm, much less a business deal at that time. So I was really focused more on the animals. And when I was 14, my dad gave me the responsibility of the newborn unit. The farrowing house is what it's called. And so during that summertime, I lived there. I stayed with them, whatever. And we did a lot of work, and so we weaned the highest number of pigs we had ever weaned during that farrowing, and it was in an old crude building, nothing elaborate like we have today. And so that really got me more involved into the agriculture even at 14. So if you want to know who influenced me other than my dad, it was the people that I read about, and the people that when I got into the crop side of things, that their accomplishments in some of these higher yielders in Nebraska, in Iowa, I was reading, in Illinois, I was reading articles that was coming from them, and I'm saying, wow, that's pretty neat. And so when I say the people that inspired me is more about who I read about than my close-knit people that had an influence over me.
Is that who you labeled as success? Reading those people, is that where you found success in those people, or did you believe success was different as you were coming up, helping with your father and the animals? What was success to you?
Well, again, I'll have to go back. If you're asking what I looked at success being, is when we were in the hog operation. And my deal was I love genetics. I love working with efficiency with those animals. And so when I say we had one of the higher producing small farms, but yet higher efficiency in feed efficiency, number of pigs weaned, etc., that was coming through our facility, even though it was small, than anyone that I'd ever went and visited in my network of going and looking at those. And it was really some people that I was trusting. Like I had a really good feed salesman, and he was really open, and he was really encouraging to me. And his name was Mr. Fred Myers, and he worked for Continental Grain Company. And he really encouraged me. He told me what I could do, and he didn't say what I could not do. And so that just set me on fire to do more. And we had a really good relationship, and so he was very influential as far as the animal side of things. And then in 1988, we were harvesting corn, and we came in. I got into the farrowing house that night about 10:30, and I saw we had two guys that were hired with us full time, and I saw that with a lot of things that they didn't get accomplished that day had actually cost me money. And so I told my dad we're going to close down the animal side of things. And we were still harvesting corn, and my dad sat in the combine and didn't say two words. I was driving a truck, and I could tell that I had offended him, because that was our livelihood. That was what had fed us for years. And so the next morning after that day of not saying two words to each other, I came in, and my mom and dad were sitting at the breakfast table, and he turned around, looked at me, he said, "Well, I think you've made the right decision." And it changed. That took a lot of the stress off of us, and that was a pivotal point in our operation. And so I had to go from selling our grain in pounds of pork to then I was selling bushels. And that was a transition time for me. It was about 1988 and 89, is going from actually putting all the grain that we were growing through the animals into selling it as bushels.
How did you first get into fertilizers and soil health and crop production?
Well, I had a really good pioneer agronomist that encouraged me to enter into the NCGA. That's the National Corn Growers Contest, because of our yields. We were growing some really good yields. And in my previous time working with the animals, I was really focused on nutrition. And I was really focused more on some of the micronutrients and elements that really increase the production in the hog operation. So reading about crops, I got to understanding a little more about how critical some of those micronutrients were. And so we asked our fertilizer salesman, "Hey, we want to put some boron into our fertilizer." And the first words out of his mouth, he told my dad, well, he says, "Boron can be toxic." And so it kind of slowed my dad down a little bit, and my dad said, "Well, I want you to do whatever Phillip wants, and the amount that he wants in there." He says, "If it kills a crop," he says, it'll be all right." And so that was a time that my dad was willing, if I was going to make a mistake, to let things blow up. And that was a pivotal point in us increasing our productivity on the farm, and also the quality of the grain that we were growing at that time.
Your dad really empowered you.
My dad let me make a lot of mistakes, and he was understanding that.
What were you seeing in the industry that just didn't make sense to you at that time?
Well, I had just won the North Carolina no-till yield for the highest yield, and I'd also won the soybean yield contest. I go to our local university, and I said to them, "I see a lot of things that I'm missing in my fields, and can you help me understand why I'm seeing tip back on corn, why I'm seeing soybeans that abort the blooms, abort the pods, whatever it may be. I'm wanting to capture that." And I said, "I see that I'm missing that, and I'm wanting to capture that." And they were saying, "Well, you had the highest corn yield, you had the highest soybean yield. you're doing some things right, I would just suggest that maybe you put more nutrients on. And we've all done that in the industry and with very limited success. And so I went into full-blown replicated research on my farm, and we started looking at some things outside of the box, and we found some things that we thought were working, and we quantified them in these replicated research plots. And that's really what, if you want to say what catapulted me into wanting to change, is seeing and understanding that we could make that change. And we were making that change, even though the industry may not want to accept that and what we were finding. And that's really what kind of fueled the fire and led me into really starting my own company eventually, about 15 years later.
Would you say that was the point where you realized you seen things differently than other people?
Most definitely. Very much an odd shaped block that was being attempted to fit into a round hole or a square hole. It was definitely, I was odd shaped because I wasn't mainstream.
What mistakes did you make early on that shapes how you operate today?
Well, some of the most profound mistakes I made is when I ventured out in consulting on other farms. They were things that would work in our region of the southeast there because of our lower C's in our soil, lower organic matter, that when I ventured into some of the Midwest states and working with people, that I didn't have as great a success. In fact, I got an opportunity to leave the farm in North Carolina to go do research for a farm in Nebraska, and spent 6 years on that farm doing research. So the things that I was so excited about in North Carolina, when I got into Nebraska on that different soil type, I could not get them to be as successful. And so that was when I say a rude awakening, so I say a lot of times we're programmed. And we're programmed to what works in our environment, or we're programmed to what works in our lifestyle or for our family or what have you. And that program, when I left North Carolina and went to Nebraska, it did not function the same way. So it was another learning curve for me that, hey, wow, that was some huge miscalculations on my part or misunderstanding, and it gave me a totally different perspective on what growing crops really entailed.
You built a reputation around liquid fertilizers and biologicals. What were you seeing before others caught on?
Well, again, reading and people's success that were outside of my area, reading a lot of that and reading, okay, a guy in Nebraska, a ridge tiller at the time, used a tremendous amount of buffalo manure. You had another guy that used compost. You had another guy that used feedlot waste. And you had a one guy that did deep, when I say chisel plowing, that where he worked in his manures and things on his farm. And I'm reading and studying about that, and I'm saying, okay, what's in that that's making them different? Because everyone that didn't have availability to buffalo manure, everyone did not have availability to feedlot manure. And I'm saying, okay, there's certain enzymes in that manure, there's certain bacteria, maybe some protozoas in the bacteria that's coming through the digestive tract of that animal that I don't have on my farm. And I'm saying, okay, how can I duplicate that? How can I mimic that? So some of my first experiences where we actually attempted to brew some compounds on our farm and mimic that and work to see, can we do this? Can we replicate what they're experiencing through something that is much easier to use, which would be a liquid, and more user-friendly rather than spreading 5 to 6 ton of buffalo manure or 3 ton of chicken litter per acre.
As you were developing that methodology, or was there ever a moment where something just clicked for you scientifically or practically as you were working through that, where you just go, I got it, or an aha type of moment?
Well, yes, there's key aspects of all of this, and it's much like working with a producer and going to his farm. You're looking at is what is the most limiting factor on his farm, and how can I help alleviate that most limiting factor? And sometimes it's not anything that I have, yet you attempt to help him alleviate that most limiting factor. So looking at my farms, just like here in Tennessee, we're working with 3 farms of our own now. And so I'm looking at my limiting factors on these farms. And it takes a while to learn those. It's not just going in with a miracle cure, and it's finding those limiting factors. And so working with a producer, finding that limiting factor. So I guess my aha moment is when I worked with a certain biological technology that was immediately successful. And we monitored that, and I took it to several of my producers, and we mimicked my success. Some farms we had even greater success. And so I'm saying, okay, this is rock solid. This biological is functioning the way it's supposed to, is performing the way it's supposed to, is making an economic difference on the farms that we take this to. So that was an aha moment of saying, okay, this one works. I've looked at products that needed to be put on at 70 degrees ambient temperature, and the moon had to be in a certain phase, and the stars had to be in a certain alignment when you applied it, or they would come back and say, well, it's your fault. So I actually found something that, when I said has a higher fail proof on it than anything that I'd ever worked with before.
How did those farmers respond when you first started sharing these ideas? What was their response at first?
Well, as I said, we're programmed. So if we, and I say this a lot, something that we've been programmed from a very young age, or something that we've been programmed to accept during our lifetime, is to even consider that could not be really 100% rock solid, a firm belief, to give that up. And to say, well, there is another way of doing this other than, I'll say, NPK or some type of chemistry in a jug. And so we've been programmed about that. I'll go back to giving a story about my dad that he told me. It was before I was born, but the Tennessee Valley Authority, after the Second War, had all this surplus nitrogen and phosphate. And so they went out and developed a program where they said, we'll give it to the producers, we'll give it to the farmers, see what type of response they get, and and see if that's a way that we can move these excess, I'll use the word commodities, that we have. My dad tells a story about he planted the farm now that was our home farm. He purchased it from a neighbor. He planted it in corn, and the TVA guy came around. He says, well, we've got this fertilizer, we got this nitrogen product. And he encouraged my dad to put on 100 pounds to the acre. Well, it was what we know now is today is Chilean nitrate. It's like 15.5 to 16% nitrogen. And he told my dad, he said, put 100 pounds on your corn crop. So my dad goes up to the neighbor, because my dad had just got out of the service. He goes up to the neighbor and he says, Mr. Lavender, he said, I'd like for you to come down and bring your cultivator, because he had a fertilizer distributor on it. He says, I'm wanting to put 100 pounds of this fertilizer on it. He told my dad, he said, well, you'll burn it up. He told my dad, you'll burn your crop up by putting that fertilizer on there. My dad, again, give him credit, he was open-minded. He says, well, come on, if it burns it up, it burns it up. And so that was the first 100 bushel yield that had ever been in that region at that time. My dad produced it on that field that year.
Let's talk about the world record corn yields. How did that opportunity come about for you?
Quite by accident. And when I say I've really been fortunate to work with some really high quality people, with my research that I was doing in Nebraska, that company, I got the ability to be introduced to Francis Childs in Iowa and the opportunity to work on his farm. And some things I had done there with an airplane late season on some corn. We flew on some late season fertility in Nebraska, and even did it on a neighbor's farm, and we saw quite astonishing. It was about a 10% increase by going on at brown silk with certain nutrients. And so I was up at Francis's, and I said, Francis, I said, I think we can increase your productivity. And so he was open to that. So we went up and flew on the same nutrients that I'd used in Nebraska on his farm. And that was the first world record that I had an opportunity to work with, and that was the 442 bushels at Francis Childs' farm.
And in that area, what would be the average?
200, probably.
So double.
Yeah. And Mr. Childs was a really good farmer. He had been in the Iowa Master Corn Farmers for years. Had been in the, he'd been in the 300 bushel arena, so he was used to those high yielding crops.
So specifically, I know you walked me through that. If you laid out a standard operating procedure, and I said, what specifically did you do differently than conventional practices to double the average for the world record?
Well, again, he was a really good producer. He had been in the 300 mid 300s before I went or got the opportunity to go there and work with him. He was very open. He was open to doing things differently. In fact, he did things differently. And when I told him, I said, Francis, I think we have an opportunity here to increase the bulk density and improve the test weight. And I said, decrease the amount of shrinkage in the kernel. Well, his eyes just lit up. And he said, okay, what are you thinking about? And I said, well, we need to put on some nutrients here. Is that kernel is finishing on the ear. And I remember the day that we were flying it on, and we walked out in after the plane had, and there was just small little specks. He said, Phil, I don't think you're doing that much, because at 3 gallons per acre with an airplane, there's not a lot of evidence of that on the leaf. And I said, Francis, I said, just be patient. and we had a very substantial result from doing that.
Did you know at the time this could actually break a record?
No, I did not. I did not. It wasn't in my mind that we were going to set a world record at that time.
How do you feel about that? Seeing that success from being a part of that, I mean, that's a big deal.
I probably at the time didn't realize what it would lead to. I'll just say I did not at the time realize what it would lead to and the opportunities it would present for me. And I have to give thanks to the company I was working with too at that time to allow me to have that opportunity. So it wasn't just me, it was that company allowing me to have that opportunity.
What's broken in modern agriculture right now?
What I feel like is broken in modern agriculture today is we've gotten away from the basics of plant functionality. And when I say the basics of plant functionality, we don't think of the quality of root exudates that the plant is exhibiting. That's all we did in the first world record is we increased the quality of root exudate with that 3 gallon of a foliar fertilizer is we improved what the plant sent out through the root system to stimulate the biology to release the nutrients. And I really feel like in modern agriculture, we're not even thinking about the root exudate that plant is sending out and how influential that it is on what we end up with. If we're not getting a good quality root exudate, then we're not getting a real high quality plant and not getting the maximum nutrient uptake into that plant. And that's my focus is let's get maximum nutrient uptake. It's not what we put on as far as the major nutrient elements.
What are farmers being told that you fundamentally disagree with?
Well, let me say this. It's not that I don't disagree that it takes a pound of nitrogen to produce a bushel of corn, and I'm going to talk corn. We can talk any crop. But I'll talk corn because that's the main focus of, I guess, the ag industry. I'm not disagreeing with that. We've been taught, I was taught, I've got my hand up, I was taught that we had to put that nitrogen out there to produce that bushel. That's not true. The air that we breathe, the soil microbes have an opportunity to bring that nitrogen in from the air that you and I are breathing and make it available to the plant. We've been taught that a corn plant does not have the ability to do that. A corn plant has the ability to do that if it has the right bacteria and fungi that's colonized on the root system can supply a substantial part of that nutrient uptake and nutrient need for that crop.
If a farmer follows conventional advice, where does that lead them long term?
Well, I think we're setting in a prime example of that today, and as we're going into the spring planting season here in 2026, we have producers that are out there that wondering if they can continue on in this pathway. Everybody wants to blame something other than taking responsibility themselves. I know I will not create a lot of fanfare with what I'm going to say here, although we need to change our way of thinking. We are looking at someone else being responsibility for our ills, and we're looking at someone else or some government entity or some government program to come in and rescue us. And this country was really built supposedly on free enterprise. And And we have been driven like cattle down a chute, down a certain pathway with crop programs, government programs, crop insurance, etc., that has led us to where we are today. And without those systems, we're thinking that we cannot be successful. In today's marketplace, everyone's waiting on the new farm program to potentially get us through 2026. And that is, we've been led down that pathway that this is essential for us to stay in business. And what has happened is the people that are owning the land, that if I'm leasing land from them or renting land from them, they have gotten into a culture of it's very profitable for them. And so when corn gets to $4 a bushel, where it was $7 when we set these land rent prices or whatever, our landowners are not willing to adjust back to help the farmers. And so the producers themselves are saying, can I go to that landowner and renegotiate after they've been used to getting $300+ an acre? Can I tell them for me to stay in business, I'm going to have to cut that in half? And so it's a culture that we've been guilty of developing as farmers, because what we'll say, well, you know, Bob's going to give up that 300-acre tract. We'll go flying down the highway, go sliding into the landowner's driveway and say, I'll give you $300. And think that that's going to make us more successful, rather than farming the number of acres that we can do maybe with 50% inputs. And yes, I said 50% inputs, and still be profitable. It's not, yeah, I've been involved with, I don't know how many world records now. I know over 10. I'm not kept up with all of them. That's not my focus. My focus is keeping that farm profitable. And everyone wants to think, okay, I've got to produce 250 bushels of corn to be profitable. Yes, if you're spending an outrageous amount of dollars on inputs. If you cut those inputs by 50%, what do you have to make then to be profitable? And again, it's extravagant land rent. Now it's extravagant inputs from NP and K. You know, with what's happening in the world today, those prices are going up. I mean, I figured a while ago that fuels went up almost 60% during this conflict. And how much farther is it going to go? We don't know. It's something we have to adjust to, though.
What role do biologicals and soil health really play in the yield and the profitability that you're talking about?
Oh, I think it's very critical that we have to get our soil biology, and I've said this in a lot of meetings, the yield you're getting is your soil's biological capacity to make nutrients available. I've said that for years, and I will stand on that when I went on Francis's child's farm, when that first 442 bushels, is the most biologically active farm I have ever been on. And I still to today, that I've ever had the opportunity to be on. You know, my goal is to somehow mimic that on one of the farms here in Tennessee. Is it going to be hard in our environment? Yes, because we don't cool down at night like he did. So it's going to be difficult. That's one of my goals, and we got to have something to shoot for. But I really think that soil biology is the key to this. Why are we having to put on as many fungicides as we do today that we didn't have to put on 30, 40 years ago? And some people say, well, we're just more aware of them now. I don't think so. I think we're chemically farmed ourselves into being dependent on these fungicides everything, because now we're talking about putting a fungicide in the seed trench. We're going to come back with at least 2 more fungicides. Why? Why are we needing to do that when we've gotten out of balance with our competitive exclusion? If we have the proper bacteria and fungi in our soils, that they're going to consume some of these detrimental pathogens that harbor over in our crop residue from year to year, that jump up and bite us as the season goes along.
Would you say that's the biggest mistake costing farmers money today, having just relying on too many chemicals to solve the problem?
Yes, and guys that do poultry litter or do some type of animal waste, they're seeing that they're getting a response from it. And I'm saying they're getting a response because it is more biologically friendly to put those out than it would be, potassium chloride or MAP or DAP or something like that. It's more friendly to the soil biology. So you're getting a response, and you're getting a response because it's more friendly. So till we start thinking about what we drive our equipment over or what we walk over on a daily basis on these farms, that's the key, is what's underneath our feet. Until we start managing that, what's underneath our feet, and everyone thinks, well, here's my soil test. Okay. So I remember 40 years ago, we were talking about the onset of berry rate technology. We were talking about grid sampling and everything. And I can go to a guy's farm and I say, okay, you very rated this farm now for 30 years. How much has it changed? And I get this look. And I get this, well, it might have saved them some money because they quit applying as many nutrients, but yet it hasn't evened out their soil test. And that's what we were told in the beginning. You're going to bring your lower phos areas up, and you're going to, yes, I will agree as far as pH and calcium that we've done a better job of managing. I don't see that that's happened with P and K. Definitely not P, maybe K, but definitely not our phosphorus levels.
Why did you start Genesis Ag?
Well, again, it was quite by accident. And when I decided that, hey, I'm going to develop my own company, what had happened to me is we had went and built some technologies that I felt like the industry was lacking. And I went to some private third parties and said, I want you to build this for me. And we had done that, and then all of a sudden they were marketing against me. And so when I finally decided in December of 2014 to start Genesis Ag, a lot of the people that I was working with said, well, why did you wait so long? And so then we brought everything in-house and started working in-house, and so we're more in control of what we're doing. And there's great products from a lot of different companies out here, and I have to, tip my hat to them. And we don't have everything. There's other companies that have great technologies too. I know the ones that I'm working with, and I'm understanding them more and how they work. And it excites me more each day about where we can go with these type of technologies.
What makes your approach different from those traditional ag suppliers?
Their focus is and they teach and train this to their teams. Their agronomy teams have been taught from the major universities. And we've been taught, okay, if you take 250 bushels of corn off, you're going to be removing this much N, this much P, and this much K, and so you have to put that back on. And it's a really good sales model. It really is, and they've been taught that, and they work that plan to the T. And so they're out there working these soil tests and saying this is what you have to put on for a maintenance level, whatever it may be. And it's been really well. I mean, I was bought into it early in my career, in my farming. Okay, we took this off and we have to put it back on. I look at things totally different now because when the Creator created this, he knew that plant has the ability of sending out through the root exudates. It's like you and I going to a restaurant and ordering a meal. That plant has the same ability. And today's Friday. It will send out its order for what it needs today. The microbes will go into a mad feeding frenzy, and they replicate every 20 minutes, and they will just be devouring whatever the order is, and then they will die off that quickly. And that's what releases the nutrients to the plant, and also the excretions that the biology has. I mean, their waste will be released into that, and that plant will pick that up, and then it's a process again. That plant breathes in and out just like you and I do. And I say, we breathe in, and that plant takes the nutrients up. We breathe out, and then we put the plant exudates out. And it's a constant order. This is what I need. This is what I need. This is what I need. And the biology is saying, okay, here it is. Okay, here it is. Okay, here it is. And the plant's taking it up. We're not looking at that. And so to get that in tune with creation, that plant has the ability to exponentially multiply that small amount of phosphorus that it takes up in that plant. And we're not even considering that. That it can, when I say thousands X that small percentage of phosphorus in that plant, that it exponentially builds it. That what the result that micro particle of phosphorus that it took in, when it gets into the plant through photosynthesis, it can take it exponentially in that plant and multiply it to do a far greater. Because if that wasn't true, how can forests continue to live? How can I have a cousin that did some fertility work in pines down in Georgia, and they actually degraded the quality of the material, the plant material, where they fertilized it. It was less usable than where they let it grow naturally. So could we be doing that? And I'm not saying everybody needs to be organic. I'm not saying that fertility has no place. I'm saying that fertility, when you look at the amount of phosphorus reserves in the world, they're not our friends. So I think American agriculture, if we're going to maintain ourselves, we need to start thinking about, okay, how can I farm differently? Because that resource may not be there from now on. I mean, and you know, nitrogen approaching, the highest numbers that it's ever been, phosphorus approaching the highest numbers it's ever been. How are we going to stay in business if we keep using the same rates that we've always used?
Quantify the kind of results that your clients are seeing by using your techniques.
Well, I will say that we have fallen flat on our face at times till we really learn more about plant physiology and plant functioning and how our biology works in certain, when I say climates, pH, CECs, there's a lot of things it's variables. We had to build companion products to go with the biology that would actually work in a higher pH. We had to build certain companion products that would sustain the biology in, when I say more harsh environments. And because when you look at the mineralization in North America versus 100 years ago, we have depleted out over 80% of the minerals in our topsoil in 100 years. And that's scientific facts, that's not my facts, and I can show you those documents. So when we've depleted those minerals out, and we're looking at ourselves as in our culture, that how healthy are we? And are we eating a diet that is deficient in these minerals that we actually need and the crop actually needs? So to look at that, and I think biology has a potential if handled correctly. And in some of our first phases of working with this, we put it in an environment and we thought it was bulletproof. Come to find out, it was such a hostile environment that our biology never had a chance of really taking off and doing what it needed to do in that environment. So we built companion products, that feed the biology, like carbos. We also built companion products for the vitamin and minerals. Yes, biology needs vitamin and minerals just like you and I do to support it, to sustain it. So we had to put that in certain environments to get the biology to do what it needs to do and function in the way we need it to function.
At this stage of your life, what matters most to you professionally?
I guess what matters to me the most, I want to, most of all, is preserve the family farm. I want the farms and the families that want to be able to pass it on down to future generations. I want to be part of that. That was how I grew up. I think I would like to be able to help more family farms stay in business. The corporate farms are going to go corporate. They're going to go mainstream. Not really wanting to change that aspect. It'd be great if we could. It's not that I'm not going to attempt to do that. It's just the family farm. The guy that his grandfather's still involved, the father's involved, and the grandson's involved. I go to a lot of those, and the grandson, I'm just going to just say it like it is, kind of like a deer in the headlights. How am I going to fit into this? Is this something that I want to do for 50 more years? And I want to be able to say, okay, there's an opportunity here if we change how we're farming, that he can farm for 40 to 50 more years.
What should every farmer measure that they're currently ignoring today?
Okay, what I feel like every farmer needs to measure, and it's probably one of the most difficult things to measure. I think that we're getting better technology that's going to let us be aware of this. There's things that we can do though as producers, and that could be something as simple as a potentiometer. Going out and looking, okay, do I have a compaction layer? Do I have a hard pan? Am I getting water infiltration? There's a water infiltration test that you can look. One of the neat things that's really going to tell you how good a job you're doing as a producer is go out in several different locations on your farm right prior to harvest and taking 1,000th of an acre and looking at those ears, taking those ears, weighing them, weighing the amount of grain that are on those ears, and looking at your variability. There's a lot of 400 bushel ears in an acre of corn, yet there's a lot of ears that only is going to produce 150 bushels. So why do we have that variance in 1,000th of an acre? And I think that's a really eye-opening experience that I think farmers aren't looking at. And I will typically sit with a guy and he said, yeah, we grew 200 bushels of corn. I said, what's your planting population? And he'll say, well, it was 32,000. It's about 0.35 pounds of grain per ear. And I said, let's shoot to see if we can improve that to 0.4 pounds. That's how I like to move with someone in the small increments. And I say, there's no need to increase population unless you've got at least a 0.5, a half a pound of grain per ear. And everybody wants to say, well, what population should I plant? And this is where I'll go back. If you're not having a half a pound a ear, you don't even need to think about increasing your population. There's something else that is limiting you. So I think going out and looking at your final product, not just running the oh, well, we made 235 bushels. Okay. You need to look at the variability because you've probably got some ears out there that will really impress you when you run that at 32,000. That would be a really good average on your farm, and that's kind of what I think that would be a really good measuring tool for most producers.
Final question. What's something you've never been asked in an interview that you think people should hear?
I guess something that I've never been asked in an interview, would probably, I would say it like this: if you had an opportunity to go back and redo some things, as far as career goes, I mean, there's a lot of things that we all would probably want to go back and redo, but as far as career goes, there's very few things that I would want to do differently. I would say for me personally, in the last 5 years, I've lost a lot of my energy towards my calling, and I'm getting that back. I've had some hurdles. I've had some people that I confided in and I really trusted, and my goal is to help everyone. And every farm I walk on, I will always tell them, I will learn more being here than I will ever bring to you. Most people don't understand that. But I'll leave a farm understanding a concept that I didn't have before I arrived. If they have a void on their farm that I can see and understand, a lot of times I will not share it with them. I've had producers that's actually, when I say gotten a little upset with me, because why don't he just tell us? And the thing about it is that they're not ready. And to tell something to someone that they're not ready for, it would not be received properly. And now I'm back on some of those farms after 5 years, and they're becoming ready. They're asking the right question now. And so to answer that question is, I lost my zeal. I lost my zeal to get out here and continue my calling because of my disappointment in how people received me and received me doing nothing but attempting to assist them and help them. And so when I say now I've got a renewed calling, that I'm not concerned about that.
What happened? What changed it? What flipped it? It's hard to come back.
It is, and I'll have to use this example, and it's a religious example, and for those it turns off, that's fine, but it's a religious example that I was hurt when I was 14 years of age in I'll say religion. I was disappointed in some people because I was looking at the people and not at Christ as my personal Savior. And so what happened to me as I was looking at those people, and so I said, if this is Christianity, I don't want any part of it. And so I walked away for 14 years. So it's 28 years of age before I said, why should I let those people steal my pleasure? Same thing happened in this industry as I was befriended by some people, and I was really talked ill about with some of these people that I had really helped and confided in, and helped them actually set world records. And so when I say, wow, if this is what this industry is about, I don't want to be part of it. And we didn't shut the company down, although I was not as zealous or had as much zeal, if you want to say, about going out and changing the world. And so I actually went through a program, and a self-help program, and I said, why am I allowing these people to take away from what I feel like my gift is, to take away from my calling? And so it's just like this week here, I've been setting up my next 3 weeks, and I'm excited about it. I'm back to doing what I really enjoy doing, and I had been away from that. And it came from this, when I say somewhat being ambushed by people.
Sound like you found some peace.
Well, I have. And again, there's so much need out here in this industry. And there's a lot of companies that are just like Genesis Ag. And I encourage them. I mean, I ran into some of them at the farm show in Louisville. We're friends. I said, great. And there's so much to do out here for one company to think they're going to do it. No, it's not going to happen.